You're crazy.
It's so.
You crazy.
Hello?
You crazy.
Okay, yeah. Okay, my microphone works. Just making sure. Okay. This is going to be a continuation of talking about people. Because I was going through. Not this one. I was going through this. And started just fleshing out a bit more of what I wanted to say. But people part two. Because when I spoke about people. On, right? That works. Okay, that works. When I wanted to talk about people, I wasn't necessarily encompassing the entirety of what I wanted to talk about, because it is one dynamic to talk about people in the sense of their nature aspect and their nurturing aspect, but these two things don't really make sense when I explain the whole grand scheme of things, because I was just talking about two subsects of science that revolve around the nature of people and the nurturing of people. And the nurturing is where it gets a bit more into what I really wanted to talk about, which was people part two, the community aspect of it and the industrial aspect of these things. Because what people don't understand is the habitation of people kind of plays into resources, or at least it plays into the understanding of how to manage resource or resources. Because as there are communities, there are industrial, right? You can't, you know what I mean? Like, think of this as an old timey sort of thing where a group of people couldn't exist or couldn't create a village. This is a very weird example, right? People couldn't just make villages wherever they wanted. There were a few requirements. One was having a well, a river, and I want to say wages, but in reality what I'm trying to say is a living. That came down to either farming or, and this is kind of like a subsect break of it. It came from making a living. And with the advent of agriculture, with the advent of ranching, and with the advent of animals, farms, the creation of certain products, right? You know, examples: milk. We got cheese. We got fruits. Either way, just commodities, right? Like, these are just essential resources that at the end of the day all go back to people, at least to feeding people. So there is this weird way of, right? People like to think that nation building, or the way politicians or the way world leaders view humanity, is through the same way that we view each other. But the way we view each other as citizens is through a very individualistic standard. The way that people at the top, people who manage corporations, people who manage trust funds, people who manage worldly affairs, they see people more as a resource. And it's kind of what I wanted to talk about. When you view human life, you people like to have the rose-tinted glasses of viewing human life as an individualistic, like, happy-go-lucky, like, everybody has freedom of rights and this and that, and we're all special snowflakes. And it's just like, nah, shut the fuck up. Like, that's not how this works. All right, that comes through the fantasization that we've developed through literature, books, movies, forms of entertainment, and just looking at life through a veneer of what's nice, I guess. But that's not where I'm going with this, because we're talking about world leaders, right? The industrial aspect of things comes down to political bodies corporations. Just gonna put corporations, companies, resource gathering. That comes down to a few things, because that comes down to oil, metals, how do I get this? How do I word this? It's like the backbone of the industrial machine. So like we're just gonna put, I guess, resources, or how do I say it? Compound resources, right? Because I'm describing like what is the most basic component of a resource. Raw resources. There you go. My brain sometimes does give me answers. Raw resources. So political bodies, corporations, and keep in mind, corporations only matter because inevitably corporations do tend to cash out. They tend to cash out certain political bodies to make sure that their businesses kind of run more smoothly, or at least there are usually backroom deals that facilitate certain things. People would like to assume that it doesn't happen, but if you've ever bought bananas, trust me, there's a certain intelligence agency that had huge amounts of interest, effort. They started a revolution, they started a coup, and by the time that they took over the banana company, nobody in the nation had figured out that all of their raw resources were stolen. If you've ever bought the bananas, I think they're called Chiquita. I'm just gonna put Chiquita bananas. This is a prime example of corporations working alongside an intelligence agency, working alongside political bodies in order to attempt a seize and control over a certain raw resource. It happens. It's just what it is. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, it's not money, it's not influence. It's just that there are certain people that exist in our lives that know that they can exert a certain amount of they can just exert certain actions in our reality that will get them what they want. It's a weird roundabout way of saying some people saw that there was money to be made and they were like, I want that for myself, and they basically took it over. But again, this comes down to raw resource management. So the industrial wing of people are in political bodies. People exist in corporations. People exist in these companies. People exist in the supply chain of oil, metal gathering, and raw resource gathering, and working the fields, tending the fields, tending. And then this gets even worse with the industrial aspect of things, because you have lawyers. By lawyers, I'm just talking about the paperwork that kind of goes into this. And by paperwork, I mean contracts, things that have to get signed. Legal birthrights kind of come into mind when talking about this. But, you know, if you don't have a lawyer, an accountant, or any of those, you'll never get into those discussions. You know what I mean? All resources in our reality have been managed, because usually there was somebody who witnessed the importance of owning something, or at least having their name being associated with the ownership of these certain things. That goes into other bags of just conspiracy stories that we can get lost in. All right, and this is just the industrial aspect of things. But the most important one is what I'm trying to point over here, right? Because between the industrial and to the resources, you have workers. And I put that over here. Labor? I wanted to spell it with the U, but I don't know where this idea came from. Probably my British friend. But labor, right? The bracero program. The people who work the very basic end of the jobs in order to facilitate the greater corporation, company, ranching life, farmers, janitorial people that keep everything running smoothly, the people who manage the roads, the people that maintain certain railways, etc., etc. Right? There is that labor force, and labor force itself is a raw resource, right? And this is why community kind of ties in between the labor and a community, because these are, I want to say, neighborhoods. Neighborhoods. Because without having neighborhoods, without having a place for to house these people, you can't facilitate any of the things that need to get done. Sewer management, construction jobs. Like there are jobs that are actually kind of controlled by union workers at this point in time, that are the most required thing in existence. In order for a city to exist, there are certain workforces, or communities of workforces. I'm basically just saying that certain cities, or at least people don't understand this, is that in order for a city to function the way it does, it requires certain workers to exist. If you do not have these workers that exist, the power grid doesn't work, the sewage systems don't work. What would happen if garbage collectors as a whole just disappeared, right? There are certain jobs that are immensely important in order for a city, or certain aspects of communities or cities or towns. Like if certain jobs didn't exist, the whole infrastructure would just completely, it would turn into a shit show. But that's a whole other bag of worms that I'm not going to get into yet. So communities are essential in being a resource. Humans, humans, humans as a resource. Yes. So, where am I going with all this? Okay. So, understanding that humans are a resource, you understand the importance of labor. Understanding the importance of labor, to give a quick example, let's look at China and India. China essentially controls basic production. And the basic production of everything, from batteries to electronics to soldering boards to motherboards to, those little green boards that exist in electronics. That thing, the circuitry, all of that is basically manufactured in China. And if it's not China, it's Taiwan. And if it's not Taiwan, it's some East Asian nation who just has cheap labor, which is where we get into India. India controls our server systems, or at least the IT, the Internet of Things, people who are just technically savvy with certain programming languages. They're basically handled in India. It's kind of where we get a lot of these fake, what do we want to call them? Hello, is your computer running? Well, you better. Okay, that's a fucking dad joke. But it's more the thing of, we think of India as being a scam calling kind of nation. But in reality, that came about because there are so many people that understand the technology, that the tech illiteracy, the fact that there are still huge portions of American populations that just don't understand technology, like at all, right? One of the quickest ways for you to get that phone call and quickly get them to hang up is just name some of the certificates that exist in the IT realm. They'll leave you alone quick because they'll realize, oh, I'm not talking to somebody stupid. Like, I can't just scam this fool. Either way. So basically, India is becoming I don't want to say a technology utopia. Some people would get really mad if I said that. But when you kind of compare the school of thought and how more up to date a lot of their younger populations are in terms of understanding technology, not from the usage standpoint, but from the technical standpoint and programming language. India, by far, to some degree, is more tech savvy than Americans. Tech savvy? I don't know how to spell savvy. I'm a bit of a weetod. Servers, IT, tech savvy. But both of these nations have something in common, and that is giant population, right? And this translates into cheap labor. At the end of the day, that's the big idea that I'm trying to really convey here. In China, they basically handle the basic production of everything. And the Philippines, Taiwan, and all these other places. Not essentially to a degree Korea nor Japan, but they have a role, right? Essentially, the powers that be, the people that created the Bretton Woods Agreement. That's a very big idea. I don't know if I can get that. Bretton Woods? I think that's how you spell it. I think this word's wrong, but not the point. There's an agreement called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which essentially guaranteed that the Navy would protect everything. All of the trading that goes around the world, the Navy would essentially facilitate and protect the seas. And it basically allowed for all of this kind of trading to go on. And the Bretton Woods Agreement also kind of gave birth to the SWIFT system. More on that later when we get to talking about money and the transfer of value. But either way, the Bretton Woods Agreement was a very interesting thing that essentially facilitated for China and India to become cheap labor for the rest of the world. So, back to the big idea. People have no... We like to think that there are basic rights for people, but that's not real. Like, there are no basic rights for people. Nations guarantee certain rights to people, but when you compare the standard of the rights that you're given as a person, and you compare them in terms of what nations essentially offer, you'd realize why America kind of leads the forefront in that. But America's downfall is the fact that everyone's... How do I say this? Everyone's caught in a standard of living that is artificially created through the media that we consume. People don't understand that they're being programmed in a very subconscious, subversive way. Like, monkey see, monkey do, right? We exhibit certain behaviors, certain attitudes based on the identity that we assume. But if you look at where we learn these identities from, and where we learn how to act with one another, right? How do we play along with others? When you kind of get to the nitty-gritty stuff of where did we learn all this from, it is essentially like this giant kind of like human game that we're playing. But the standard of it, or at least the rules that were put into place artificially. There were certain things at play that we weren't necessarily aware of as humanity as a whole, that essentially we've allowed to dictate our lives, and we've allowed these systems to essentially teach not just us, but our previous progenitors and our children and the future generations. We allow this system to basically hijack the minds of these people, and it essentially creates this undertone or this theme of life. And it's very different for every nation. Not every nation has, right, like this thinly veiled subversive system that is trying to hijack people's minds. But it's more evident when you look at popular culture, especially certain trends that kind of go global, because there are two kind of trends that go global. One are memes, right? Memes, and the other one is anything that the marketing industry kind of has a stake in, because the industry, right, certain marketing firms understand that there are certain trends that could only go as far as a nationwide thing, because the meme, or at least the association level of it, only really translates to the people of the nation, while you have other marketing ideas that go global, and sometimes most of those are just accidental. Most of the time. Most of the time. There are like some AAA celebrities that you could just say the name of in a different country and people would kind of get the idea of what you're talking about. But that kind of interest, or at least the rental, I wanted to say the rental space that you kind of occupy in people's minds, depends on the interest value of how, like, why does that person value that thing? Very complicated ideas that I'm trying to like pin down here. So, people as a subject is very complicated. So, we've talked a little bit about labor. Now let's talk about the product management of this stuff. The creation of these materials, the managing of people. And by people management, one of the things that I like to talk about is destroying the steel markets here in America. I also have an anecdotal story where I could talk about somebody who I knew was essentially the, how do I want to say it? He was the head of a steel mill. I'll just say that. But being the head of the steel mill, essentially he just taught people. He was just somebody that taught people how the machines work. Taught machine ethics. We'll just call it ethics. Can't think of another word to say. So his whole job was essentially to teach people how to manage and work the machines. Well, this person who was the head of the steel mill eventually was kind of drafted to teach Chinese people. ACH. To teach the Chinese. Well, what he didn't know was in teaching the Chinese, he was essentially, how do I say this? The company in America went bankrupt. Where do you think all these jobs went? They went to the Chinese. They went to the Chinese. So he didn't realize the end goal of all this. His management, or at least the people that were above him, knew that he was an integral part of this structure. So they were like, "Hey, we need you to teach how these machines work, but you need to teach the Chinese how all this works." And by the time that the program ended, it was like a 6-month thing, and he taught all the Chinese how all of these things worked. He eventually taught the person that replaced him. Hilarious stuff. Like, the joke just plays out itself perfectly here. So, people management. Understanding the importance of certain employees. Because certain employees, or at least what I'm trying to get to is skill sets. Certain skill sets you can't replace. Certain skill sets only really could be handed down in a weird way, calling it an apprenticeship, where only if you're working on the field and actively during the time of this industry existing, you can only really teach that at that moment. Because, as time goes on, there are new techniques, there is new software, there are new things that are needed to be taught to the next generation of workers. Excuse me. So, that's just people management and product management. Now, in product management, the new thing on the internet is gauging interest. the interest of the mind. Where are the ideas, or where are people kind of going? Where's the new interest? Where's the new trend? Where's the new thing? So essentially, the market is just chasing the money. Nowadays, at least the way it's been for a very long time, is, how do I say this? What's that one show? Shark Tank? Is it called Shark Tank? It's that show where you can essentially showcase product, idea, or seek funding. Is what I'm trying to get. The system itself already controls all basic resources. Yeah, product management also goes into, how do I say this? Raw resource. Raw resource. What do I want to say? Production centers? I think that's what I want to call them. Places where, right, you can't just kill a cow, take its skin, and it just magically turns into leather. No, there's a whole process that goes into that. And there's a whole process that goes into taking a raw resource and handling it and then transforming it into the other basic side of things, which is raw leather or a raw fabric, or, right, getting silkworms and then turning it into a silk fabric, because the production center just produces the basic good, right? Once you have a basic good, that eventually goes into what we call, I can't call it a production center, a manufacturing center. Yes, let's go with that word. That works good. Manufacturing. A manufacturing center. And this is where you get, let's just say bags, dresses, apparel. No, go with that. Toys, electronics. Either way. What else could I put here? Right, goods. I'm just gonna put goods. Not a basic good, but a basic material. A better idea, because you can buy these. It's kind of when you go to like Hobby Lobby or you go to Michael's, you essentially buy just basic material and you take that material and then you turn it into something else. Anyway, that goes into a manufacturing center. Manufacturing center creates goods, bags, apparel, toys, electronics, etc., etc. This is where you get into product management, right? But in all of these things, right? Let's go back to Shark Tank, showcasing a product. This system, this industrial system, requires one thing: people. Like, people are the backbone to all of this. All of this. Without people, their skill sets, their knowledge, just them doing what they have to do with their hands in order to get things done, people are required. At all levels of this infrastructure. At all levels of this infrastructure are required. So there is a real big idea that I'm trying to drive with the fact that people are managed like if they're resources. A great example of this was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's that one representative from New York. Amazon was trying to facilitate a deal in her area, and basically it was an Amazon center. And this Amazon center wanted to allocate a certain amount of jobs for this area of New York. Well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got involved and destroyed that deal. What people don't understand in that dynamic is that she essentially fucked with the salary budgeting, right? Because companies have to allocate, there's an accountant, there's somebody inside of this structure that understands that they need to hire a certain amount of people. They need to have certain amount of people putting clothes away, opening boxes, putting price tags, right? There's like a level of certain aspects of a business model need to be facilitated by workers, is what I'm trying to say. Big ideas here. Now, what people don't understand is companies put a lot of time and effort into understanding all of this. And they put an even bigger emphasis on understanding what's their budgeting like, right? They really allocate. Oh my, the cats are going wild outside. They really allocate portions of big money to certain areas. But with salary budgets, you get, it's kind of weird to call it this, but to some degree, you get wealth creation. Because certain jobs, certain positions are going to offer certain workers a certain amount of wealth, a certain amount of livelihood. Salary budgets come with positions. Positions, structural status, either way. And salary budgets can also dictate environments. A great example of this is Motown and how it was a cultural center for a lot of things, but the moment that they took away the motor industry out of Motown, it completely destroyed that entire environment. You had people go from having really cozy jobs to now people are kind of essentially robbing one another and for basic needs and basic requirements. So salary budgets could really create and destroy communities, housing districts, housing structures, either way, right? Because essentially the sort of work that people do offers them a certain amount of money, and with that certain amount of money can offer and really change dynamics in not just neighborhoods but in all realms of life. Really, really complicated stuff. I don't even know what I'm just rolling off the tongue here. People like to view people as individuals and respect people's identities and all this other shit, and I'm like, no. I get when we're dealing with one another like this, it's easy to do that. But when you look at the people who essentially get to control our lives and control our environments and control our jobs and control all of this other stuff, who are the same people that are kind of rubbing elbows with other very powerful, influential people, and then you have very influential groups of people that kind of create little gangs amongst each other, and then they kind of push their agenda on the rest of the world. You know what I mean? Like, we just wake up, please. There's giant fucking problems we need to handle, but we won't get anywhere if people don't understand how all of these dynamics work along with one another. Either way, I'm getting lost here in the weeds. Labor, product management, right? Between labor and between product management, right? Because people are essentially a product or a resource. There's salary budgets. Now, it is very difficult to say that companies, businesses, there is a certain status quo that we live by, and that's some people like to call it minimum wage, but it's not just minimum wage. Minimum wage comes more of a problem when it gets into like politics, because essentially you have the state dictating what somebody's salary should be. And that's not, once that dynamic happened, it doesn't really benefit small business owners. It only really empowers and embolsters big corporations, because they're the ones that have the raw power to just fling money and fling budgets in certain directions and essentially get to control what happens in certain demographics purely by chance, purely by the fact that they have the capital and the resources in order to create businesses out of nowhere. But that's a whole other bag of woo woo. Where do I want to go with this? Kind of touching on a lot of topics here. Labor, product management. Yeah, I think I should just leave it here, because I did not plan on going too long today, because I just wanted to really describe that there are a variety of different perspectives of how to look at people and how to look at what our lives are degraded to when it comes down to companies, corporations, lobbying groups, trust funds, boards of directors. Because something that I ran into when I was kind of writing this out, which was I was essentially trying to describe cybernetics. But in describing cybernetics, all I wanted to really, like, the basic idea that I wanted to get to was that the Josiah Junior Macy Foundation, that's just one board of trust fundees, or one board of funders, or one group of funders. And the Plutonium Files was just me showing that you have a long history of people who have money, who have capital, and they've always wanted to guide, steer, and manage people as a resource. Not as an individual, not with the respect of your rights, but they wanted to do it in a subversive way where they could guide the masses into making certain decisions, into changing aspects of our culture and aspects of, right? I'm basically showing that there's this one foundation that had an idea. They had a vision of creating a group of people and steering their life decisions. And in the Plutonium Files, I'm essentially showing that you had aspects of government who were funded by these private funders, and not only did they envision a utopia where they could control people's lives, but there is proof in the pudding. Like, there's actual evidence that shows that they put this into practice. They actually attempted to steer and to see what realms of humanity that they could control, push, steer. Like, with the Plutonium Files, they essentially, pregnant women, prisoners, random patients that would just walk into a hospital, and it just so happened that one doctor was involved with this one secret study. And this one doctor decided that, hey, I'm going to decide to have a secret experiment on this one patient, and he's not going to know. Right? There were a variety of levels to this system where the rich got groups of scientists in order to push their agenda or push their vision, or at least test the ideas that they had. And this happened back to back to back. Right? I'm just using two examples here, but there's modern American history shows that you have a variety of different interest groups who want nothing more than to control the lives of people. They wanted to test the realms of possibilities of things that they could do. Not in that order. It's just, as time went on, they kind of figured out that these people are idiots. They don't really give a fuck about what we do. Let's just do it. Like, they just don't care. A great example of this is the show Stranger Things. Stranger Things is now a cultural icon thing in our lives. But yet, people don't realize that Stranger Things comes from an actual government experiment called Project Montauk. And in that Project Montauk, it's one of the projects that stems from the MK Ultra studies, which kind of stemmed from them testing psychedelics on people to see what was possible with the human mind. And if they're talking about psychics in a way where they just make it seem cool with 11 and whatever, but people don't kind of realize that if this is what the TV show is trying to portray, what about the Project Montauk? What really happened there? But then you would look at, there was a very systematic effort into destroying all of the research material that came from these projects. We don't really know to what levels and to how far certain experiments were pushed, because you had a lot of people in government who, I don't know if by all right, but like, you had a lot of people in government who did not want these papers to see the light of day. So we're kind of left wondering, how far did you push the envelope and what did you discover? Because this is just, I'm pointing out to the overarching program, which is called MK Ultra. But then we're talking about Project Montauk, which eventually got made into a TV show. This is just one aspect of our lives. This is modern American history. But when we look at what modern American history is degraded to in our public education system and our private education system, you hear none of this. I'm not saying that we should teach this in schools. I'm just saying that there is a clear, concise effort in making sure that we do not realize what's really happened in the last 100 years in this country. And it would be very telling with how our lives have turned out and with how our environments exist as they are now. A lot of this was planned, and it was planned with malicious intent, heavily. And I could go into how all of this works, but slowly, not all in one go. But either way, that was just me kind of further elaborating a conversation piece about people and how people are essentially a raw resource, and how the next one's going to be the culture of governing, or at least something along those lines. I haven't fully thought it out yet. I need to keep writing. But yes, we'll leave that here.